My mother-in-law humiliated me on my birthday by deliberately putting my husband's ex-wife's name on the cake. My mother-in-law brought a cake to my birthday with another woman's name on it, and I laughed so hard I almost scared myself. Not because it was funny, exactly. It was one of those laughs your body throws out when the alternative is flipping a table in front of 12 people and your kid is sitting 3 feet away with frosting on his cheek. The name on the cake was my husband's ex-wife's name, written in thick pink icing like some smug little signature, and his mother stood there in my kitchen pretending it was an innocent mistake. A habit, she said. Just a mix-up. Like she accidentally kept a custom bakery order in her purse, drove it across town, walked it into my house, and set it down right under the banner my son had helped tape up before school. Sure. Totally normal. I was turning 35 that day. I had a paper crown my son made me, a sink full of salad bowls, a cheap bottle of sparkling juice because it was a school night and I still had to help with homework later, and a husband standing so still beside me I could almost hear something tearing inside him. His name doesn't matter as much as the fact that he had spent most of our relationship being the kind of man who defended me in soft, reasonable ways. He'd say, "Mom, enough." He'd step between us. He'd tell me in the car afterward that she was bitter and embarrassing and he was sorry. But he came from a life where apologizing after the damage counted as conflict resolution. I came from a life where if someone humiliated you in public, at least one aunt threw a spoon. So we had different baselines. I looked at the cake, then at her, then at the guests trying not to make eye contact. And I said, well, don't worry, everybody. We also don't take her memory seriously, so let's keep this moving. It landed harder than I expected. A couple people laughed. One of my friends choked on her drink. My son, who was 11 and painfully observant, looked between my face and hers like he was trying to decide if adults ever got less weird with age. His mother, and honestly, that's still how I think of her sometimes, as his mother, not really as family to me, went stiff and pale, then red. She clearly wanted me shattered. Instead, she got sarcasm and a knife handed to my friend, who scraped the wrong name off while muttering, "This is unhinged," under her breath. The party went on. That part probably irritated her most. I opened the sweater my son picked out with my husband's help. I let my friends sing badly. I took pictures. I ate a lopsided slice of cake with a blank white patch where the ex-wife's name had been. But all through it, I felt my husband beside me in this strange, careful silence, not numb, not checked out. More like he had finally reached the place where a person stops explaining bad behavior and starts storing it. Later, after everyone left and my son was in his room pretending to do homework while absolutely texting his cousin about the cake drama, I stood at the sink rinsing plates and my husband said, very quietly, "She's done." I turned off the water. "You mean emotionally or actually?" Actually. That should have felt satisfying. It mostly felt scary, because I knew his history. Not every little detail at that point, but enough to know his mother had trained him to confuse guilt with loyalty. He was 32, and by then I'd learned that whenever he spoke in that flat, settled tone, he wasn't venting. He was deciding. We met at work 4 years earlier, in one of those bland office jobs where everybody lives on coffee shop sandwiches and fake urgency. He was funny in this dry side comment way that sneaks up on you. I was a widow with a young son and exactly zero interest in being someone's healing journey. He was a divorced man with the haunted look of somebody who had spent his 20s apologizing for things he didn't do. We became friends first because friendship was safer. Then he started walking me to my car. Then he started bringing my son those stupid puzzle books from the discount store because he'd heard him say he liked mazes. Then one rainy evening, after we'd both worked late and I was so tired I cried in the copy room because the machine jammed for the 3rd time, he made me laugh so hard I snorted coffee and ruined whatever dignity I had left. That was pretty much it for me. His mother hated me on sight. Not loudly at first. She's smarter than loud people. The first time we met, she smiled too much and asked whether it was challenging for him to date a woman with a child. Then she asked if I still saw my late husband's parents. I said yes, because they loved my son, and I wasn't going to cut off good people to make other people comfortable. She gave this tiny nod, like she'd just confirmed something dirty about me. From then on, it was constant little cuts. Comments about my age, comments about me having so much baggage, comments about how some women move on fast, though by then I'd spent years alone just trying to survive grief, work, rent, and elementary school pickup schedules. She made every normal thing sound like a moral failure. What made it harder was that she wasn't his only wound. His whole childhood was basically a live-in lesson on what happens when two broken adults weaponize each other and call it marriage. His father cheated constantly. Not in a glamorous movie way. In the boring, humiliating neighborhood way. Waitresses, co-workers, somebody from church, somebody's cousin, somebody who sold insurance and liked to call the house at dinner time. His mother responded by telling her child everything. Every affair, every suspicion, every cheap gift she found, every lipstick stain, every phone bill. He wasn't a son to her. She treated him like her emotional dumping ground from the time he was a kid. She cried to him, raged to him, asked him what women those men liked better had that she didn't. Imagine being 9 and your mother asking if she looked old. Imagine being 12 and hearing details about motel receipts. Imagine being 16 and wanting to disappear into drywall. Then she pressured him into marrying young. That still makes my eye twitch. When he was 23, she pushed him toward the daughter of one of her friends. A good girl, she kept saying, which apparently meant a woman his mother liked because she was pretty, agreeable in public, and eager to get married fast. He dated her briefly, got cornered by family pressure, and before he knew it, he was in a marriage he never looked comfortable inside. He told me later he kept waiting for the panic to fade. Like maybe adulthood just felt like being trapped and everybody was pretending otherwise. It got bad quickly. The ex-wife wasn't some cartoon villain. She was charming when she wanted something and destructive when she didn't get it. She'd scream, throw things, spend money they didn't have, then cry about abandonment if he pushed back. She wanted a baby before they could pay their bills on time. She wanted the apartment upgraded, the furniture replaced, the life curated. By 26, he was exhausted and ashamed and walking on eggshells in his own home. When he finally left, his mother acted like he'd abandoned a saint. For years, she talked about that woman like the marriage had been his one decent chance at respectable happiness, and he had ruined it. She kept photos, brought up memories no one asked for, compared me to her in ways both subtle and disgusting. The cake wasn't a random cruelty. It was part of a shrine. 2 weeks after my birthday, her birthday rolled around. I didn't say a word about it. I had enough going on with work, my son's school project, and the lingering hum of anger in my house. My husband wasn't ranting. He wasn't even bringing her up, which honestly was worse. It felt like living next to weather. The day of her birthday party, he came home from work, changed his shirt, and asked if I was ready. He sounded polite. Too polite. For what? I asked, though I knew. He held up a bakery box. I stared at it. No. Yes. No. He looked me right in the eye. I need you to trust me. That sentence makes people in movies melt. In real life, it usually means somebody's about to do something you absolutely should not co-sign. I crossed my arms and said, I trust you to make me nervous. He almost smiled, but not really. Fair. I should tell you that I am not the kind of woman who enjoys pretending to be better than I am. Part of me wanted her embarrassed. Part of me wanted her humiliated. I won't lie about that. I had spent years swallowing her little comments, her fake concern, her habit of talking around me like I was an expensive mistake her son insisted on keeping. But I also knew his mother was not stable in the regular sense. She was held together by resentment and image. Hit one, the other split. And I was scared of what he had chosen. By the time we got to her house, I knew from the smell of baked ham and the volume of her voice floating out the front door that there were plenty of witnesses. Cousins, family friends, one aunt who always brought store-bought rolls and then took credit for helping. The usual. We walked in with the cake. She was in a blue dress she wore every time she wanted to look like the wronged heroine of her own life. She kissed her son's cheek like nothing had happened at my birthday. That's her whole thing. She believes if she refuses to acknowledge a cruelty, it becomes a misunderstanding everyone else is rude to remember. Then he set the cake down. I saw it before she did. White frosting. Elegant piping. 4 women's names written in a neat ring around the center. Women his father had cheated with. Not guesses. Not vague references. Real names I recognized from stories she'd told so many times they had become household ghosts. The room changed temperature. She stared at the cake for a full second. Maybe 2. Which was just enough time for people around her to read it too. Her face emptied out first. Then it filled so fast it was almost ugly to watch. What is this? She asked. My husband didn't even shrug. I thought we were doing memorable women from the marriage. I actually closed my eyes. Just for a second. Because there it was. No soft defense. No polite redirect. He'd gone straight through the center. She started yelling immediately. Not words at first, just sound. Then his name. Then, how dare you? Then me, of course. Because somehow I was responsible for every thought he had after meeting me. I was the corruption. The spell. The older woman with a child and opinions. She called me vindictive. She called me trashy. She called me poison. And he stood there while she unloaded all of it and said, in this calm voice that made the whole thing worse, "I learned from the best." That shut her up for maybe half a breath. Then he said something I don't think he'd planned to say until it was already coming out. "You spent my entire childhood telling me about those women, their names, what they wore, where he met them, how stupid you felt, how ugly you felt, how much you wanted him to suffer. I was a kid. You made me carry your marriage like it was my job. So if you want to talk about cruel, let's talk about cruel." Nobody moved. Even the aunt with the rolls froze. His mother started crying, which would have hit harder if I hadn't seen her cry mid-insult before. She used tears the way some people use volume, but this was different. She wasn't in control of it. She looked exposed. Not sorry, just exposed. Like the inside story had leaked into the outside room and she didn't know how to push it back in. He kept going. "You humiliate my wife because you can't stand that I'm happy with somebody you didn't pick. You ignore my stepson because he isn't useful to your fantasy. You keep worshiping a marriage that nearly wrecked me because it made sense to you. And then you come into our house and put my ex-wife's name on my wife's birthday cake? You don't get to pretend you're confused anymore." I wish I could say I handled that whole moment with saintly composure. I did not. I was sweating. My heart was pounding. Part of me wanted to drag him out of there before he said something he'd never be able to take back. Another part of me, the petty little goblin part, thought, finally. Finally somebody is saying it where she can't rewrite it later. She called him ungrateful. Said she sacrificed everything. Said I had turned him against his own blood. He told her blood didn't give anyone a free pass. He said family wasn't supposed to feel toxic all the time. One of the cousins covered a laugh with a cough. I remember that because it was such an insane thing to notice in the middle of a family implosion. But that's how shock works. My brain was picking up stupid details because I couldn't process the big picture. Then she looked at me and said, "Are you happy now?" And before I could stop myself, I said, "Honestly, no. This is exhausting." Which was true. Revenge sounds exciting until you're standing in somebody's dining room smelling sweet potatoes while a 60-year-old woman cries over a cake full of dead marriage trivia. It wasn't glorious. It was sad. Necessary, maybe. But sad. We left while she was still shouting. He didn't hug her, didn't apologize, didn't even look back. In the car, neither of us said anything for a while. The whole thing had that weird aftertaste big fights have, where your body is buzzing, but your mind can't decide whether to cry, throw up, or ask if anybody remembered to lock the front door. I finally said, "That was nuclear." He nodded. "You okay?" "No." "Do you regret it?" He thought about that longer than I expected. "I regret that it got to the point where it felt necessary." That answer sat with me, because it was honest, and because it told me the part I was most afraid of. This wasn't me pushing him. This wasn't him performing loyalty to me. This came from someplace old. The next few days were chaos. Relatives called, texted, left voicemails full of words like cruel and heartless and overboard. One family friend said his mother had to go to urgent care because she couldn't stop shaking. Another told him she was emotionally collapsed, which sounded dramatic but also believable, because women like her are built around control, and he had snatched it right out of her hands in front of an audience. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt tense. Those are different things. I started wondering if one day, months from then, he'd wake up drowning in guilt and decide I was the reason he'd lost his mother. I know, that sounds paranoid. But when you've been widowed young, then rebuilt a life piece by piece, you get very alert to the ways happiness can turn and blame you on the way out. My son was at his grandparents' house on his father's side that weekend. The good grandparents, the ones who never treated me like a contaminated product, so I took the chance to say what I was actually thinking. We were in the living room, laundry on the couch, one lamp on, nothing cinematic, just regular life around an ugly conversation. I said, "I need you to answer something honestly, and I need you not to say the comforting thing just because it's easier." He looked up from the pile of mail in his hand. "Okay. If she gets worse, if this drags out, if she gets sick, if the family keeps acting like you buried her alive, are you going to blame me for not stopping you?" He put the mail down slowly. "No. You say that now. I mean it now. That's not the same thing." He leaned back and rubbed his face. He looked tired in a way I recognized. Childhood tired. The kind that doesn't come from work. "You're not in the middle of this, Nadia." I hated when he said my name gently during hard conversations. It made me want to throw a pillow at him. "I am, though," I said. "I'm your wife. She hates me." Everything she says to everybody somehow comes back to me. If this becomes the story of how you abandoned your fragile mother for your difficult wife, that's not exactly abstract to me. He sat there a second. Then he said, "Can I tell you the ugliest version?" "Please." And then he did. Really did. Really? Not the edited childhood version he'd given me before. Not the summary. The ugly one. The one where he'd come home from school and find his mother on the floor crying over his father's lies. The one where she'd call him into her room to ask if he thought another woman was prettier than she was. The one where she once made him listen to a voicemail from one of his father's mistresses and asked him if he thought his father was laughing at her with that woman. He was 10. 10. I remember grabbing the edge of the couch cushion so hard my hand cramped. He told me how, after the divorce, she basically transferred all the intensity of that broken marriage onto him. He became her audience, her proof, her emotional spouse without the title. If he dated someone she disliked, it was betrayal. If he pulled away, it was abandonment. When he married the first time, she loved it mostly because the woman fit the role she'd chosen. When it turned toxic and he wanted out, she blamed him for ruining her version of stability. Then I came along, older than him, with a son, with dead in-laws I still loved, with a whole pre-existing life that didn't revolve around auditioning for his family. To her, I wasn't just inconvenient. I was evidence that he had become his own person. He started crying somewhere in the middle of that, quietly, like he was embarrassed by it. That always gets me more than loud crying. Loud crying asks to be seen. Quiet crying feels like somebody ran out of energy to hide. I moved to sit beside him, and he said, "I don't want our kids growing up around that." Our kids, plural. At that point, it meant my son and whatever future maybe existed, but the way he said it mattered. Not my kid. Not your kid. Our kids. He looked at me and said, "She doesn't care about him." He meant my son. The boy who had spent years trying to be polite to a woman who barely acknowledged him. The boy who brought a card to her on holidays anyway, because I was still trying back then to model grace. She never bought him birthday gifts without my husband reminding her. Never asked about school. Never learned his interests. He existed in her orbit as this inconvenient attachment I came with, like a coat I forgot to leave at the door. "I know," I said. "No." He shook his head. "I knew it before, but I let myself pretend it was awkwardness or generational weirdness. Or whatever. It isn't. She doesn't think he counts. And if we ever have a baby..." He stopped there. We weren't trying. We weren't not trying either. But I had convinced myself my body had moved past surprise. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. He finished anyway. "If we ever have a baby, she'll split them in half. She'll make one special and the other tolerated. I lived that kind of poison already. I'm not recreating it." That was the moment something settled between us. Not joy, not relief, more like clarity with a bruise around it. We decided that night to cut contact. Fully. Not take some space. Not set softer boundaries. We had done that. Soft boundaries are snacks to people like his mother. We blocked her number. Then the backup number. Then the cousin she used as a messenger. He sent one final message that said he would not be speaking to her for the foreseeable future, that any attempts to contact me or my son would be considered harassment, and that he was done participating in her version of love. I read it before he sent it and said, "This is going to hit like a brick." He said, "I know." Then he hit send. The silence afterward was strange. Peaceful, technically, but also eerie. You don't realize how much emotional static someone pumps into your life until it stops and you can hear the refrigerator again. For a while, we were jumpy. Every unknown number made me clench. Every car slowing outside the house made him glance through the blinds. But weeks passed, then months. Family gossip cooled into that passive-aggressive fog people create when they don't approve but are bored enough to move on. And then, because life has impeccable timing and a cruel sense of humor, I got pregnant. It wasn't one of those cinematic moments where I knew immediately because the room tilted and birds sang. I was cranky, late, weirdly hungry, and furious at a coworker for breathing too loud. I took the test in our bathroom while my son was at school and my husband was at work. Then I sat on the floor staring at the result like it was a typo. I had my son young. Then I lost my first husband after a long illness that aged me a decade in 2 years. After that, survival took up most of the room. By the time I met my current husband, another baby felt theoretically lovely and practically unlikely. So seeing that test was like being handed a future I hadn't let myself plan. I called him and said, "Don't panic." He said, "That's never a good opener." I said, "I'm pregnant." Silence. Then, "Are you sure?" "No, I just wanted to spice up your afternoon." He laughed, then immediately sounded like he might cry. "I'm coming home." He did, and we sat on the edge of the bed holding each other's hands like we were about to go on stage. I was scared. He was scared. We were all so happy in this careful, disbelieving way. My son found out that evening because he noticed I was acting weird and flat out asked if I was dying or pregnant, which felt rude but efficient. When I told him, his whole face changed. He hugged me, then my husband, then asked if he'd have to change diapers. We told him absolutely not unless he was looking for extra allowance. He said he'd consider it. That's our family tone in a nutshell. Tenderness wrapped in dumb jokes, because otherwise the feelings get too obvious. We shared the news more widely a little later than some people do because I needed time to trust my own body. Eventually, we posted a photo on a social media app, just the three of us holding a sonogram picture, smiling like cautiously hopeful idiots. And right on schedule, the ghost came knocking. Not literally first. First, it was a message request from an account with no profile photo and a username that looked like somebody's cat walked across the keyboard. Inside was one sentence. "I know I don't deserve this, but please let me apologize before the baby comes." I stared at it and laughed. Not a fun laugh. More like, wow, she really does think timing can put lipstick on motive. I showed my husband. He went quiet in that way he does when old Payne arrives wearing a fresh coat. "Blocked account," he said. "Obviously," I said. "But she's only reaching out now." He nodded. "I know. The thing about manipulative people is that sometimes they are technically telling the truth. I'm sure she did feel regret. I'm sure being cut off hurt. I'm also sure she could not stand the idea of a biological grandchild existing beyond her reach. Those truths can sit right on top of each other. Over the next few weeks, messages came through relatives, random accounts, even one handwritten card shoved into our mailbox with no stamp. Everything was about the baby. Not us, not me, not him, certainly not my son. The baby, her grandbaby, her family line, the chance to make things right before it was too late. She talked like she was applying for access to a bloodline, not trying to repair harm she caused. I said to my husband one evening, "Let's test something." He already knew what I meant. Mention both kids? Exactly. So he sent a brief reply through one relative who had somehow managed to stay mostly neutral. It said that any conversation about reconciliation would have to involve respect for our family as it existed, including both children. Her answer came back within an hour. She said, of course, she had nothing against my son, but this was different because a newborn needed family bonds from the beginning. There it was, the split in one sentence. Nothing against him, as if indifference counted as generosity. Different, because blood. She gave herself away without even realizing it. I said, "Print that." He looked at me. "Print it?" "Yep, start a folder. I don't trust her." So we did. Screenshots, printouts, timestamps. Not because I wanted to live in legal anxiety, but because women like her escalate when denied. They don't accept no. They treat no as the beginning of a campaign. By the time I was 6 months along, relatives were back on their usual nonsense. One aunt called to say I'd regret keeping a grandmother from her grandchild. I said I was more concerned about keeping toxicity away from all my children than preserving somebody else's title. She called me dramatic. I told her dramatic was bringing your son's ex-wife into your new daughter-in-law's birthday cake. She hung up on me, which saved me the trouble. My husband struggled more than he admitted. Not with the decision itself, with the pressure. You could see the little boy in him still twitch when older relatives used words like duty and mother and only family left. He gets tired sometimes, like the guilt is easier than fighting it. One night I asked, "Do you miss her or do you miss the fantasy version where she could have been decent?" He took forever to answer. The second one. That answer broke my heart a little, because I knew exactly what he meant. I still did that with my own past sometimes. Missed versions of people who never really existed, except in the little hopeful edits I kept making. By the 8th month, I was huge, sweaty, annoyed by gravity, and sleeping like a raccoon in a dryer. My son thought it was hilarious that I needed help getting off the couch. My husband treated me like a sacred relic and a bomb at the same time. Everything smelled too strong. My back hurt. Random people in grocery stores suddenly thought my body was public conversation. It was a magical season. If by magical you mean I cried because we ran out of cereal I didn't even like that much. That's when his mother showed up. No call, no warning. Just a hard knock at the door on a Saturday afternoon while I was wearing one of my husband's old shirts and trying to convince myself folding baby clothes counted as rest. My son was in the living room with a handheld game. My husband looked through the peephole and said one word, "No." He opened the door but kept the screen shut. She had done herself up for sympathy. Nice blouse, careful makeup, that strained look around the mouth people get when they've been rehearsing martyrdom in the mirror. She said his name softly, like they were in a reunion scene and not on the edge of a restraining order. "Go home," he said. "I just want to talk." "No. I came all this way." "That sounds like your mistake." Normally, I would have admired that line more. In the moment, I was too busy feeling my pulse in my neck. She saw me behind him and immediately shifted target. "Please," she said, putting a hand on the screen door. "I'm trying to make peace before the baby comes." My son came closer then, curious, and she didn't even look at him. That's the detail that still gets me. Not the shouting later, not the police. That she had this boy standing right there, a child who had tried for years to be kind to her, and her eyes slid right past him as if he were a lamp. My husband told her again to leave. She refused. Then came the volume, fast. She started crying and raising her voice at the same time, which I didn't even know was physically possible until meeting that family. She said I had stolen her son. She said she had a right to know her grandson. She said nobody could keep her blood from her. That phrase landed like a slap. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not because I was brave, because I suddenly knew we'd need proof and memory was too easy to manipulate after the fact. She kept going. Neighbors started peeking out. Curtains twitched. Across the street, somebody actually stepped onto their porch with a mug, which felt rude but fair. My son moved closer to me, and I wrapped one arm around him while holding the phone with the other. The baby kicked so hard I flinched. My husband said loudly and clearly, "You need to leave my property now." She pointed past him toward my stomach. "That baby is family." My son looked up at me then. Just looked. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The whole street could have disappeared, and I still would have heard that sentence for the rest of my life. My husband said, "And he is too." She snapped, "That's not what this is about." There it was. On video, no confusion, no softening, no plausible deniability, just the hierarchy she'd been trying to hide. I said, "You're done. Leave." She turned on me fully then, face twisted in a way I had only seen once before. At the cake incident, when the mask slipped and she forgot who she was pretending to be. She said, "You don't get to decide who belongs in my family." And because pregnancy apparently removed my last filter, I said, "Actually, in this house, I do." Then she tried to push the screen door. Not break in. Not some crime show nonsense. Just that entitled lunge of a person who thinks being told no is a technical problem she can solve with force. My husband shoved the door shut and locked the main door. Then he called the police while she screamed on the porch about rights and blood and betrayal. My son was shaking. I noticed that and felt this weird cold clarity come over me. Not panic, not rage, just the complete end of debate. There are moments when a person crosses from difficult to dangerous. Not dangerous in a movie way. Dangerous in the real way. The way that stains children. The officers who came were calm, tired looking, and not at all interested in the family mythology behind her meltdown, which I appreciated. She tried to cry to them about being a grandmother. One of them asked if she'd been asked to leave. She said yes, but... And he cut in, "Then you need to leave. Beautiful. Stunning. Give that man a raise." She couldn't help herself, though. While they were guiding her back toward her car, she pointed at my son in front of everybody and said, "That one isn't even related to us." The officer actually paused and looked at her. Not dramatically. Just with that special expression people get when somebody says something so ugly it clears the room of excuses. After they left, my husband locked the door and leaned his forehead against it. I sat my son down on the couch, knelt awkwardly in front of him, and asked if he was okay. He did that terrible brave kid thing where he shrugged too fast and said, "I'm fine." He wasn't. I wasn't either. That night, after he finally fell asleep, I told my husband, "We're filing." He nodded before I finished the sentence. "I know." So we did. Police report, printed messages, the video from the porch, statements from neighbors who saw the scene. I hated it. Not because I doubted it was necessary, because I hate being pushed into procedure by people who mistake kindness for weakness. We also notified the hospital in advance. No information to anyone. No visitors outside the approved list. I wasn't about to push a human out of my body while she staged a hallway tragedy. She tried anyway, later, through calls to the maternity desk once I went into labor. The nurses shut it down immediately. God bless overworked medical staff with no patience for family nonsense. The labor itself was long, gross, painful, and weirdly grounding. Nothing clarifies your priorities like screaming through contractions while someone wipes your forehead and tells you you're doing great even though you feel like a feral animal. My husband stayed with me the whole time. My son spent that night with my late husband's parents, who loved him like breathing and showed up afterward with snacks, a clean hoodie for me, and enough common sense not to make the birth about themselves. We had a boy. Tiny, furious, perfect. My husband cried before I did. Then my son came in later and stared at the baby with this stunned, protective softness that made my chest ache. He whispered, "He looks mad." I told him that was family tradition. For about 2 days, I let myself believe Joy could sit still. Then we came home to gifts on the porch. Not cute gifts from friends. These were obviously from her. Overcompensating baby clothes in colors she would have called proper. Stuffed animals, blankets, cards addressed only to the baby. Not to us, not to our family, to the baby. Like she was trying to establish a direct line through merchandise. We documented everything, boxed it, didn't open what we didn't have to. A week later, more showed up. Then letters through third parties, then messages from relatives about how she was suffering and just wanted to love her grandson. Singular, every time. My son heard it enough that one evening, while I was rocking the baby and trying not to cry from sleep deprivation, he asked very quietly, "Did I do something bad to make her not like me?" That question hollowed me out. Children will blame themselves for things adults do with full intention. That's one of the cruelest facts I know. I put the baby in the bassinet and pulled my son into my lap, even though he was too big for it now. He folded himself there anyway. I told him no, he had done nothing wrong, that some adults were broken in very specific ways, and instead of fixing themselves, they built little ladders of hierarchy so they could stand above other people and feel tall. I said she had made a choice. And her choice said everything about her and nothing about him. He asked, "Then why does she care about the baby?" And there it was. The whole ugly thing reduced to one child's clear logic. I said, "Because she thinks blood gives her permission. But it doesn't." He nodded, but I could tell the answer didn't soothe as much as it informed. Kids remember who had to be explained to them. They remember who made adults use careful voices. The hearing for the protection order happened a few weeks later, and if you've never sat in a room while someone tries to perform innocence in front of paperwork, I don't recommend it. The room was colder than it needed to be. The chairs were hard, and every little sound felt too loud. Somebody coughed behind us. Somebody else kept tapping a pen. I remember stupid details like that because my whole body was braced for her voice. She came dressed like a church bulletin. Soft cardigan, tissue in hand. That fragile expression people weaponize when they think authority responds better to feminine collapse than to facts. We had facts. We had the messages where she ignored anything about my son and redirected every conversation back to the baby like a dog with a toy she refused to drop. We had the screenshots where she said things were different because blood. We had the porch video, which I had watched too many times by then. Enough that I knew exactly when her face changed and exactly when my son flinched in the background. We had the police report. We had statements from 2 neighbors who heard her yelling about family and blood like she was trying to cast a spell with bad values. Even one relative, finally fed up, admitted she'd said she couldn't waste energy bonding with a child who wasn't truly hers. Funny how people find conscience once there's a judge in the room. While we waited to be called, my husband sat so still he looked calm if you didn't know him. I knew him. His jaw was tight enough to crack. I put my hand on his knee and he covered it without looking at me. Across the aisle, she wouldn't meet our eyes. She kept whispering to the person beside her and dabbing at dry skin under her lashes like tears were about to appear if she believed hard enough. For 1 second, and I hate admitting this, I felt that old tug of pity. Not enough to change course, just enough to annoy me. That's the thing with people who train you in guilt for years. Your body remembers the script even after your brain throws it away. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. That's the thing about telling the truth under pressure. The simpler it is, the stronger it sounds. I said she had repeatedly harassed us after being told not to contact us. I said she tried to force entry into our home while I was heavily pregnant. I said my older child had directly witnessed her declaring him outside the family, which caused emotional distress. I said our concern was not a difference of opinion, but a pattern of fixation, escalation, and discriminatory behavior between the children. I didn't cry. I didn't give some speech about motherhood. I just answered what I was asked and tried not to look at my husband, because I knew if I looked at his face while describing what our son had heard, I'd lose my train of thought and maybe my mind. The judge asked a couple of follow-up questions in that dry, practical tone that weirdly helped. Dates? Frequency? Whether we had clearly told her not to contact us, whether there had been any effort to communicate through third parties, yes, yes, yes. The easiest thing in the world, apparently, is documenting somebody else's refusal to leave you alone once you stop hoping they'll magically behave. My husband spoke too, calmly, which, if you know him, means he was holding himself together with nails and prayer. He said he had spent years trying to preserve a relationship with his mother by asking for small respect. She had refused. He said his responsibility now was to the family he was raising, not the dysfunction he survived. He said, and this part made my throat tighten, "My older son will not grow up in a home where he is treated as less than because of an adult's obsession with blood." He paused after that, just for a second, and then added that our younger son wasn't a prize to be won, or a loophole to get around boundaries. That mattered to me, a lot. Because it meant he wasn't only defending one child from her rejection, he was defending both children from becoming pieces in her weird little hierarchy. He called him my older son, but in that room it sounded like a claim, like a vow. Then she spoke. And because some people are their own worst witnesses, she ruined herself. She cried, said she was only trying to love her grandchild. The judge asked, "Children? Plural?" And she actually hesitated, then started rambling about how the situation was complicated, and emotions were high, and of course, she wished no harm to the older boy, but the new baby was biologically connected to her in a way that couldn't be erased. You could feel the room harden. Even her own lawyer gave her this tiny side glance like, "Ma'am, why would you say it like that out loud?" Because that was the problem with her. She really believed it. She always had. She thought if a feeling lived inside her long enough, it turned into a right. The judge asked if she understood why a child hearing himself described as less connected might be harmful. She started answering the question she wanted instead of the one she got. Talked about confusion. Talked about stress. Talked about how families say things in the heat of the moment. Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she say his name. She just kept circling back to her hurt, her access, her role, her relationship to the baby. It would have been impressive if it weren't so gross. There are moments when language exposes a person's whole architecture. That was one. Not because she accidentally misspoke, because under pressure she reached for the belief she actually lived by. And there it was. Biology as entitlement. Love as possession. Family as ownership. The order was granted for a year. I didn't feel triumph when the judge said it. Relief, yes. Relief so sharp it made me dizzy for a second. But mostly, I felt tired. Newborn tired, trauma tired. The kind of tired where even vindication feels like paperwork. My husband squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt, and I was glad for the pain because it kept me in the room. Outside the courthouse, she yelled that we'd regret this, that she'd still be their grandmother when the paper expired, that nobody could keep her away forever. She kept trying to pitch her voice high and wounded like the world had been cruel to her for no reason. One of the deputies stepped toward her and she finally shut up. Even then, she stared at us like we'd stolen something instead of protected it. We renewed our locks that week, put cameras by the door, reported every violation because yes, there were a few. Cards delivered through cousins, letters slipped under windshield wipers. One birthday present for the baby left on the porch when he wasn't even old enough to know what a birthday was. We turned everything over. No dramatic confrontations, no speeches, just records. Boring, repetitive, necessary records. The unglamorous machinery of self-protection. Life, meanwhile, kept being life. The baby woke every 2 hours for a while, then every 3 just to keep us humble. My son rolled his eyes at diaper smell but would sprint to grab wipes like an underpaid assistant. My husband learned how to burp a baby one-handed while microwaving leftover pasta. I went back to work eventually and cried in the pumping room once because somebody had eaten my labeled yogurt, and that was apparently the final straw of womanhood. We fought sometimes. About dishes, money, sleep, who forgot to reorder diapers, why one of us seemed distant. Once we had a full irritated exchange over whether a load of towels had been sitting in the dryer too long, and halfway through it, we both realized we were actually arguing about fear, exhaustion, and the fact that our house still didn't feel fully settled in our nervous systems. There were normal days too, and I mean deeply normal in a way I started respecting more than ever. My son needing poster board for school at the last possible second. The baby spitting up down my shirt right before I had to leave. My husband calling from the grocery store to ask whether we needed cereal, and me saying, "If you love us, yes." We built a lot of healing inside those boring moments without announcing it. Nobody clapped. Nobody gave us a medal. We just kept doing dinner, homework, baths, bills, and mornings. Some nights the baby only wanted my husband, which secretly delighted me because it forced him into that soft, repetitive caregiving space where you can't posture and you can't avoid your own feelings because a tiny person is literally screaming in your face. I'd wake up and hear him pacing the hallway, murmuring nonsense about trucks and toast and moonlight, because apparently that's what sleep-deprived fathers come up with. Other nights he would set the baby down and just stand there for a second with this wrecked look on his face, like he couldn't believe love and grief were living in the same body at once. The saddest part, honestly, wasn't losing her. It was watching my husband grieve someone who still existed. Some nights he'd sit at the table after everyone was asleep and just stare at nothing. I'd ask what he was thinking, and he'd say, "I keep trying to picture what a normal mother would have done." Not his mother. A mother. The abstract category. The one who would have shown up at my birthday with the right name on the cake. The one who would have loved my son because he mattered to her son's life. The one who would have held both boys the same if given the chance. The one who would have brought soup after the birth and then actually left when asked. The one who would have said, "Tell me what you need," and meant it. I knew that grief. He misses the version of her that never existed. The mom who could have been normal if she'd just tried. Sometimes he'd say things that made me realize how early he learned to manage her. Stuff like, "I should have known not to tell her the due date," or, "I thought if I explained it the right way, she'd calm down." Grown man sentences built on little boy logic. It broke my heart every single time. Not because I judged him. Because I could hear the child underneath the adult. The kid who thought the right tone could prevent an explosion. The kid who thought if he stayed useful enough, careful enough, loyal enough, maybe she would finally stop making him pay for being nearby. He started getting better once he could name that pattern out loud. Not instantly. Real life is ruder than that. But I saw it. He'd catch himself defending her before anyone had accused her. He'd stop mid-sentence and say, "No, wait, that's not my job anymore." The first time he said that, I almost kissed him so hard I sprained something. My son changed too after the hearing. He got quieter for a little while, then clingier in small ways he would have denied if I pointed them out. He'd come sit in the kitchen while I cooked, even if he wasn't hungry. He started asking practical little questions that were not really about what he was asking. "Are we locking the door tonight? Are you picking me up after school, right? If Grandma and Grandpa from your old family come over, can they still come inside?" It was his brain trying to map who was safe, who stayed, who counted. I answered every question like it mattered because it did. He also started calling for my husband first when he needed help with homework. Not because he loved me less, but because trust had deepened on a level that didn't need ceremony. One night, months later, I heard him say, "Dad," by accident. He froze. My husband froze. I froze in the hallway like a creep. Then my husband just said softly, "Yeah?" and kept helping him with the math problem. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No swelling music, no speech. My son just kept pointing at fractions with his pencil, and my husband kept explaining them like his heart wasn't exploding out of his chest. That was what made it hit so hard. It was ordinary, earned, quiet in the exact right way. I cried in the laundry room after that because apparently I contain multitudes, and a lot of them are hormonal. Later that night, I asked my husband how he felt, and he sat on the edge of the bed for a second before saying, "Scared to need it too much." That one got me, because there it was again, the cost of growing up with love that came attached to landmines. He wanted the word. He just didn't trust happiness not to punish him for wanting it. People love to romanticize the idea of chosen family until choosing means excluding someone with the correct title. Then suddenly everybody gets uncomfortable. But comfort is not a moral standard. A title is not a pass. We learned that the hard way. We learned it in paperwork and baby bottles and whispered questions through a cracked bedroom door. We learned it in the ugly little moments when peace still felt unfamiliar, and we had to keep choosing it anyway. Near the end of that first year, word got back to us that his mother was telling people she'd changed, that therapy had enlightened her, that she'd learned to respect boundaries, that motherhood made mistakes and grandmothers deserved grace. It would have almost been funny if it wasn't so predictable. Transformation, in her world, always arrived right before access. She also kept using language that gave her away. Not our grandchild. Not the children, the baby, her grandson, the family name, legacy. She talked like a woman locked out of an inheritance, not a person trying to repair trust with actual human beings. When renewal time came, my husband didn't hesitate. Neither did I. Some decisions get easier because they get cleaner. The absence of remorse clarifies everything. We met with the lawyer beforehand and went through the file again. New letters, new attempts through relatives, notes about dates and drop-offs, and all the stale little ways she kept refusing to understand the word no. It was depressing how ordinary the packet looked. A neat stack of paper containing months of boundary violations. Nothing cinematic, just persistence, entitlement, and enough denial to power a small town. At the hearing for the renewal, she behaved better. That's true. She had clearly been coached. Less crying, more controlled language, more talk about understanding our concerns. She even kept her hands folded in her lap the whole time like she was auditioning for the role of respectful grandmother. For one irritating second, I wondered if a calmer performance would sway the court. People love appearances, especially the respectable kind. But calm isn't change. It just looks better from across the room. The judge asked what efforts she had made to repair harm toward the older child specifically, and she gave a long answer that somehow said nothing at all. She talked about patience. She talked about giving us space. She talked about how hurtful this whole process had been for everyone involved. No apology letter addressed to him. No acknowledgement of what she'd said. No plan except wanting a future relationship with the younger boy. Same obsession, better packaging. Then the judge asked if she understood why focusing only on a future relationship with the younger child would reinforce our concern. She tried to smile and said something about not wanting to confuse things further by forcing interactions the older one might not want, which translated out of manipulation basically meant she still viewed him as optional. I felt my whole body go still when she said it. Not shocked, just disgusted in a very clean, familiar way. Our lawyer didn't even have to do much after that. The facts were already there. The pattern was already there. All she managed to prove was that she had learned to hide the sharpest part of herself slightly better in public. Renewed. Afterward, my husband exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. In the parking lot, I asked if he felt guilty. He thought about it, then said, "Sad, yes. Guilty? No." That distinction mattered. It mattered because sadness can coexist with clarity, because missing who you needed someone to be is not the same as wanting them back exactly as they are. We got sandwiches on the way home because neither of us had the energy to cook, and also because we needed to do something insultingly normal after court. I sat in the car eating chips while he drove, and for the first time in a while, neither of us filled the air with analysis. We were just tired people heading home to children. Honestly, that silence felt healthier than half the deep conversations we'd had all year. I won't give you some fake polished ending where everything became easy and wise and tidy. That's not what happened. What's true is smaller and more useful than that. Our house got lighter. The baby learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture like a drunk motivational speaker. My son stopped asking hidden questions with his eyes. My husband laughed more easily. I stopped checking the driveway every time a car slowed down. We built routines boring enough to be holy. Grocery lists, school drop-off, bottles in the sink, mortgage anxiety, date nights that turned into us falling asleep during a movie, because apparently romance after children is just mutual unconsciousness on the couch. The first winter after the renewal, I realized an entire week had gone by without me thinking about her every day. I noticed because that used to feel impossible. She had been in everything for so long. Holidays, birthdays, text alerts, whether the blinds were open, whether the porch camera had enough battery, whether my son looked worried when somebody knocked. Then suddenly her absence wasn't a hole anymore. It was space. Usable space, quiet space, the kind you can finally put real life into. We still carry scars from it. Of course we do. He still has moments where some old reflex kicks in, and he starts defending himself against accusations nobody is currently making. I still go cold when a private number calls. My son still notices favoritism in other families, with the weird alertness of somebody who learned too young what hierarchy feels like. And the younger one, thank God, is too little to know what almost touched his life before we locked the door. Sometimes people ask whether I think she'll ever really change. I don't know. Maybe age will soften her. Maybe loneliness will. Maybe therapy actually did some good. People can surprise you. But change that matters isn't measured by tears or speeches or strategic patience. It's measured by whether the person stops demanding access they haven't earned, by whether they can love without ranking, by whether they can sit inside a boundary without trying to dig under it. So far? No. And if that sounds harsh, you should have been there when my son asked what he did wrong. My husband once told me he used to think being a good son meant absorbing damage quietly so his mother wouldn't feel alone. Now he says being a good father means refusing to hand that job to another child. That's not the kind of lesson you put on a decorative sign. It's too ugly for that. too earned. And me? I learned that loving someone with family trauma means recognizing when compassion starts getting confused with participation. I can understand what made his mother the way she is. I can even pity parts of it. A woman married to a serial cheater, humiliated for years, stuck in her own bitterness until it became identity. That's sad. It is. But sad people can still be cruel. Wounded people can still wound on purpose. I get why she's like this. Doesn't mean she gets to do what she does. That cake still comes back to me sometimes, which is ridiculous when you say it out loud. But that was the day he stopped pretending this was just her being difficult. She meant to humiliate me, and all she really did was show him exactly who she was. The last update we got about her came through that same neutral relative, the rare family messenger who mostly minds her business. She said his mother was still telling people we'd manipulated the courts, that I'd always wanted to isolate him, that my son was rude to her from the beginning, which is laughable because if anything, the kid was too polite for his own good. Apparently, she also said she had made peace with losing contact for now. The phrase for now did not thrill me, but fear stopped living in my shoulders the way it used to. So I just said, good for her, and went back to cutting crusts off sandwiches. That, more than anything, felt like victory. Not courtroom paperwork, not the renewal, not the porch video. Sandwiches, the return of ordinary life, the privilege of being annoyed by crumbs instead of consumed by crisis. My younger son is walking now. My older one is taller every 5 minutes and pretends he doesn't want hugs in public, which is rude considering what I went through to keep everybody alive. My husband still reaches for my hand in parking lots. Sometimes I catch him watching both boys together with this look on his face, proud, wrecked, grateful, all at once. Like he still can't believe he gets to build a family without begging somebody else to stop poisoning it. Neither can I, honestly. Do I celebrate her absence? Not exactly. I'm not that simple. There is nothing cute about needing legal paperwork to keep a grandmother away. Nothing empowering about realizing a child has to be protected from a woman with a casserole dish and a victim complex. It isn't a triumph story. It's a boundary story. Those are less fun and more useful. We don't talk about her much anymore. That's another kind of healing people overlook. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just reduced relevance. She no longer gets starring scenes in our daily life. She exists mostly as a cautionary tale and a locked file folder. Sometimes that's the best ending available. Not reunion, not justice with a ribbon on it, just distance, documentation, and a house where both children know exactly where they stand. With us, fully. No conditions, no ranking, no question about who belongs.